Let me tell you something about galactic politics that most interstellar diplomats would rather keep quiet. The universe is basically one giant high school cafeteria, and humans? We're the new transfer students nobody quite understands. The Galactic Confederation, a pompous collection of approximately 217 sentient species spread across 3 major galaxies, had spent millennia perfecting the art of bureaucratic posturing. They'd developed intricate protocols for first contact, conflict resolution, and interstellar diplomacy that made tax law look like light beach reading. Each species had its carefully catalogued strengths, weaknesses, and precisely measured threat potential. Except for humans. Humans were the cosmic equivalent of that kid who shows up to a formal dinner party wearing a Hawaiian shirt and cargo shorts, then proceeds to accidentally solve the host's most complex problem while spilling marinara sauce on the expensive carpet. The initial human encounters with galactic civilization had been, let's say, unconventional. Where most species approached first contact with meticulous scientific precision, humans arrived with a combination of boundless curiosity, absurd confidence, and what can only be described as weaponized weirdness. Take the Krellanax hierarchical collective, for instance, a species of silicon-based hive mind entities that had conquered 17 star systems through pure mathematical optimization and ruthless strategic planning. They had spent centuries calculating the most efficient conquest strategies, modeling potential resistance scenarios with quantum computing clusters that could process more data in a microsecond than most civilizations could in a millennium. Their first communication with humans went something like this. Krellanax, official transmission. Greetings. We have analyzed 10,743,982 potential interaction scenarios. Resistance is statistically improbable. Surrender is recommended. Human response. Cool story. Want to hear a joke about a penguin and a quantum physicist who walk into a bar? The transmission logs indicate that the entire Krellanax command structure spent approximately 72 hours trying to determine if this was some form of sophisticated psychological warfare. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. It was just Dave from Nebraska being Dave. By the time most galactic species realized humans were not just another data point to be categorized, they had already established trade routes, cultural exchanges, and inexplicable diplomatic relationships that defied all known statistical models. The Confederation's xenosociological research teams were perpetually bewildered. Humans didn't follow rules. They didn't respect carefully constructed hierarchies. They approached every challenge with a combination of creative problem-solving, dark humor, and an almost supernatural ability to turn potentially catastrophic situations into bizarre success stories. Most critically, humans seemed genuinely unimpressed by the grandeur of galactic civilization. While other species spent centuries developing elaborate first contact protocols, humans treated interstellar diplomacy like an impromptu road trip, full of unexpected detours, dad jokes, and a disturbing ability to make friends with potentially hostile entities. The underlying tension was simple. In a universe governed by carefully calculated risks and meticulously planned strategies, humans were the wild card, the variable that no algorithm could predict. The species that could turn a potential intergalactic war into a comedy routine and somehow impossibly emerge not just unscathed, but celebrated. Something big was coming. And nobody, not the Krellanax, not the Confederation, not the countless civilizations watching and waiting, had the slightest idea what to expect. Buckle up, this is going to be one hell of a ride. Let's get one thing straight about Captain Jack Reyes. He was not the hero type you'd see in those glossy recruitment posters with perfectly pressed uniforms and heroic poses. He was more the kind of guy who looked like he'd just rolled out of a dive bar, found a starship keys and decided, why not? Jack's path to becoming a deep space exploration captain was about as linear as a drunk spider's web. Born in the semi-autonomous lunar colonies, a place where urban planning meant cramming more people into less space and hoping for the best, he was the product of 3 generations of professional troublemakers. His grandmother had been a quantum engineer who got fired from 3 different research stations for inappropriate workplace humor. His father was a maintenance technician who could fix anything with duct tape, creative swearing, and an understanding of mechanical systems that bordered on the mystical. From an early age, Jack learned that the universe didn't reward careful planning. It rewarded adaptability, a sense of humor, and the ability to look a potentially catastrophic situation in the eye and say, "Hold my synthesized coffee." His official military records were a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement. Unconventional problem-solving skills was diplomatic speak for somehow turns chaos into success. He'd graduated bottom third of his class at the Terran Space Academy, not because he was unintelligent, but because he spent more time designing elaborate pranks and redesigning ship systems than studying standard protocols. The incident that ultimately defined his career happened during a routine training mission. While other cadets were practicing standard approach vectors and communication protocols, Jack managed to redirect a malfunctioning cargo drone to deliver emergency supplies to a remote mining colony that had been overlooked by standard rescue algorithms. The fact that he did this by hijacking the drone's communication systems using nothing more than a modified game controller and some extremely questionable coding skills was both horrifying and impressive to his instructors. They couldn't decide whether to court-martial him or promote him. They compromised by giving him the most impossible assignments they could imagine. The USS Sardonic wasn't just a ship. It was a testament to Jack's particular brand of organized chaos. Officially classified as a deep space exploration and diplomatic intervention vessel, it looked like someone had taken a standard military cruiser, thrown it into a blender with a jazz club, and decorated the interior using surplus equipment from 3 different centuries. His crew was equally unconventional. There was Martinez, the chief engineer, who could communicate with complex machinery better than with most humans, Rodriguez, the tactical officer who treated every potential conflict like an elaborate chess game crossed with stand-up comedy, and Chen, the medical officer who could diagnose a species' entire physiological history while simultaneously composing haiku about their metabolic processes. What the Terran Space Command didn't understand, what most of the galaxy failed to comprehend, was that Jack and his crew weren't just explorers. They were translators of the impossible. Where traditional diplomacy saw barriers, they saw puzzles. Where others saw potential conflicts, they saw opportunities for absurd resolution. Jack's personal philosophy was simple. The universe is too big and too weird to be taken completely seriously. Respect the mission, but never forget that sometimes the most effective weapon is a well-timed joke and the ability to think 3 dimensions sideways. His latest assignment came with the kind of vague instructions that made most captains nervous. Investigate potential territorial disputes in the Omega Quadrant. Maintain peace. Avoid total interstellar war. To Jack, this translated to, go have an interesting day and try not to break anything permanently. Little did he know that interesting was about to become the understatement of the millennium. As the USS Sardonic prepared to jump into uncharted space, Jack leaned back in his command chair, took a swig from a coffee mug that read, "I void Wettels" in bold letters, and grinned. Another day at the office was about to begin. The zorn'tak battlecruiser emerged from subspace like an aggressive teenager bursting into a quiet library. All sleek metallic angles and bristling weapon rays, it was the kind of ship that screamed, "We're here to have a very serious conversation, and by conversation, we mean potential complete obliteration." Captain Jack Reyes watched the incoming vessel on the main view screen, one eyebrow raised. "Martinez," he called out without taking his eyes off the massive ship. "Are those weapon systems charging, or are they just really excited to see us?" Martinez, hunched over her engineering console, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces, snorted. "They're charging, Captain, and not in the happy-to-meet-you kind of way." The zorn'tak were legendary across 3 galaxies for their absolute commitment to aggressive diplomacy. Their entire cultural structure was built around the concept that every interaction was potential preparation for conflict. Negotiation was just warfare by other means, and they were Olympic-level practitioners. Their first transmission came through, a standard-issue intimidation broadcast that was equal parts threat and bureaucratic procedure. "Unidentified human vessel," the translation matrix rendered in a voice that sounded like gravel being run through an industrial wood chipper. You have entered restricted territorial space designated under Zorn'tak Expansion Protocol 7 Gamma. Immediate withdrawal is mandated. Failure to comply will result in comprehensive molecular disassembly. Rodriguez, the tactical officer, leaned towards Jack. Comprehensive molecular disassembly sounds unpleasant, he muttered. Jack didn't even blink. Chen, how scientifically accurate is comprehensive molecular disassembly? The ship's medical officer looked up from a holographic display showing what appeared to be a half-finished haiku about metabolic processes. Technically impossible without significant quantum destabilization. Sounds impressive. Means nothing. Jack keyed the communication channel. This is Captain Jack Reyes of the USS Sardonic. We're here on a standard exploration and diplomatic mission. Might I inquire about the specific territorial restrictions? Our navigation charts seem to indicate this is a standard neutral exploration zone. The Zorn'tak response was immediate and predictably aggressive. A series of mathematical equations and territorial claim markers scrolled across the communication interface. A classic Zorn'tak move designed to overwhelm and intimidate through sheer bureaucratic complexity. Martinez leaned over. Those territorial claim markers. They're using a navigation system that was obsolete 3 galactic standard centuries ago. Jack grinned. Bureaucratic fossils. Got it. The Zorn'tak vessel began a standard threat display, rotating its primary weapon arrays, pulsing energy signatures that were essentially the interstellar equivalent of a chest-beating gorilla. Most species would have been intimidated. Most species would have started powering up defensive systems and preparing for potential conflict. The crew of the USS Sardonic, however, looked like they were mildly inconvenienced by a particularly aggressive parking meter. Rodriguez, Jack asked casually, what's our standard first contact protocol for overly dramatic species? Rodriguez consulted his tactical readout. Officially, attempt diplomatic resolution. Unofficially, make them question their life choices. Excellent, Jack said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Chen, pull up our cultural exchange database. Rodriguez, prepare our communication array. Martinez, I'm going to need you to work some engineering magic. The Zorn'tak were about to discover that human diplomacy was less about following rules and more about creative problem-solving. And by creative problem-solving, Jack meant something that was going to be talked about in diplomatic circles for generations. Incoming transmission modification, Martinez announced, fingers flying across her console. They're not going to know what hit them. Jack settled back into his command chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Perfect. The universe was about to get very interesting. Again, the Zorn'tak battlecruiser's communication array lit up with what they presumably thought was a terrifying battle transmission. Instead, what emerged was something entirely different. Attention Zorn'tak vessel. Jack's voice came through, perfectly professional yet with an undertone that suggested he was one dad joke away from complete comedy. We are initiating standard cultural exchange protocol. Before the Zorn'tak could respond, their communication screens suddenly filled with an elaborate musical number. Not just any musical number, a meticulously crafted, scientifically synchronized presentation that was part educational documentary, part Broadway production, and entirely incomprehensible. Martinez had outdone herself. The transmission was a mathematically perfect fusion of detailed geological data about human colonization, a synchronized dance routine explaining quantum entanglement, statistical breakdowns of interspecies cultural interactions, inexplicable references to 20th century Earth pop culture. The lead Zorn'tak commander, Subcoordinator Krelnax, who had personally disintegrated 437 potential threats in his career, stared in absolute bewilderment. The musical number featured Rodriguez in what could only be described as the most inappropriate diplomatic outfit ever conceived, explaining human territorial expansion through a choreographed routine that combined interpretive dance with advanced astrophysics. He was wearing what appeared to be a sequined jumpsuit that changed colors based on the mathematical equations he was simultaneously presenting. Is this a threat? Krelnax muttered to his second-in-command. Unknown, replied his tactical officer. Threat assessment algorithms are confused. The musical number crescendoed with a particularly complex segment where Rodriguez demonstrated human adaptive capabilities by simultaneously explaining the principles of terraforming, performing what seemed to be a hybrid between a ballet move and a quantum physics lecture, singing a chorus that translated roughly to, "We come in peace, but we're really weird about it." Chen, meanwhile, had contributed medical data presented as a tap-dancing explanation of human immunological responses. Each tap represented a different cellular interaction, creating a rhythmic breakdown of human biological adaptability that was simultaneously scientific and utterly absurd. The Zorn'tak communication systems were designed to handle complex mathematical threat assessments, diplomatic protocols, and potential conflict scenarios. They were not designed to process whatever this was. Jack watched the transmission with a look of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. "Status?" he asked Martinez. "Their primary communication arrays are completely locked," she reported. "They're trying to process the data, but our transmission is hitting them with so much simultaneous information that their systems are basically having an existential crisis." The musical number continued. Rodriguez was now explaining human reproductive strategies through an interpretive dance that involved what could generously be called choreography and what might more accurately be described as controlled chaos. Krelinax's tactical officer leaned over. "Sub-coordinator, our threat assessment protocols are... they're not working." "What do you mean, not working?" Krelinax demanded. "I mean," the tactical officer responded, "our systems cannot determine if this is an attack, a mating ritual, a scientific presentation, or some form of psychological warfare. The truth was somehow all of those things, and none of them." Jack keyed the internal ship communication. "How long can we maintain this transmission?" Martinez grinned. "We've got enough pre-prepared material to keep this going for approximately 17 more hours, fully synchronized, mathematically perfect." The Zorn'tak vessel hung in space, its weapon systems charged but utterly confused. Their entire martial culture was built on clear, predictable conflict scenarios. This was anything but predictable. Jack Reyes had just weaponized human weirdness into a form of diplomatic intervention that no galactic species had ever conceived. And they were just getting started. The musical transmission had been running for exactly 4 hours, 37 minutes and 22 seconds when the unexpected happened. The Zorn'tak battlecruiser's systems didn't crash. They didn't surrender. They started singing back. It began subtly, a low harmonic resonance that matched Rodriguez's tap-dancing quantum physics explanation, then a counterpoint that synchronized with Chen's immunological tap routine. Within minutes, the two ships were engaged in what could only be described as the most scientifically complex musical dialogue in galactic history. "Are they responding?" Jack asked, leaning forward in his command chair. Martinez checked her instruments. "They're not just responding, they're engaging in what appears to be a multidimensional mathematical conversation expressed through interpretive performance art." Sub-coordinator Krelinax had long prided himself on his species' ability to maintain absolute stoicism in the face of any threat. He had personally overseen 273 first contact scenarios. He had disintegrated 437 potential security risks. He had never, in his entire career, found himself accidentally participating in an interstellar musical number. Until now. "Tactical assessment," he barked at his second-in-command, who was now inexplicably tapping his command console in what seemed to be a complex rhythmic pattern. "Sir," the tactical officer responded, "our systems are processing, but not in a way I can entirely explain." The human transmission was a perfect storm of information. It wasn't just a communication, it was a comprehensive data package, disguised as entertainment, education, and absolute nonsense. Rodriguez's dance moves were actually complex mathematical algorithms. Chen's medical tap routine encoded intricate biological data. Martinez had essentially turned the entire transmission into a living, breathing information virus. Jack leaned towards Martinez. "How long can we keep this up?" "Indefinitely," she responded with a wicked grin. We've got enough pre-programmed material to continue this for weeks, potentially months. The Zorn'tak vessel's weapon systems remained charged, but unused. Their entire martial culture was predicated on clear, predictable conflict scenarios. This was anything but predictable. Krilnax made a decision that would be debated in diplomatic circles for generations. "Open a direct communication channel," he ordered. The view screen flickered. A zorn'tak commander appeared, looking simultaneously terrified and intrigued. "Explain," Krilnax demanded. Jack's response was immediate and utterly Jack. "Cultural exchange," he said, with a completely straight face. The zorn'tak commander blinked multiple times. "This is a form of attack." "This," Jack responded, "is how humans say hello." In that moment, something remarkable happened. The zorn'tak commander did something no zorn'tak had ever done in 700 years of recorded history. He laughed. It started as a chuckle, then a giggle, then a full-blown, absolutely uncontrollable laugh that seemed to break something fundamental in Zorn'tak cultural programming. "We've been doing first contact wrong," the commander gasped between laughs. "All this time, we've been doing it completely wrong." Rodriguez, still in his sequined jumpsuit, chose that moment to execute a perfect pirouette while simultaneously explaining the principles of faster-than-light travel. The Zorn'tak tactical systems, which had been prepared for total war, were now processing something far more complex. Not just data, not just information, but a fundamental reimagining of interspecies communication. Jack Reyes had just turned diplomatic first contact into performance art, into a living, breathing information exchange that defied every known protocol. The universe would never be the same. And somewhere in the vast cosmic background, something that might have been a chuckle rippled through the fabric of space-time. Diplomatic records would later show that the encounter between the USS Sardonic and the zorn'tak battlecruiser marked a turning point in interstellar relations. But official documents, being what they are, could never quite capture the true essence of what happened that day. The Galactic Confederation's Xenosociological Research Team spent exactly 17 months, 4 days, and 6 hours trying to comprehend the transmission. Their best minds, creatures with multiple brains, quantum computing capabilities, and centuries of diplomatic experience, were reduced to a collective state of perpetual confusion. Eliara Voss, the lead researcher, summarized their findings in a 10,000-page report that could be condensed to one critical sentence. Humans are not a species. They are a universal force of nature that happens to be sentient. The zorn'tak, traditionally the most aggressive territorial expansionists in 3 galaxies, underwent what could only be described as a complete cultural revolution. Their next 3 diplomatic missions included mandatory dance numbers. Their military training now included courses in improvisational comedy and interpretive performance art. Jack Reyes, of course, was completely unaware of the magnitude of what he'd accomplished. When officially debriefed by Terran Space Command, he submitted a report that was 90% dad jokes and 10% actual mission details. Standard first contact procedure, the report read in part, involved demonstrating humanity's unique ability to be simultaneously serious and absolutely ridiculous. Mission accomplished. His commanding officer, Admiral Helena Rodriguez, read the report with a mixture of pride, confusion, and a growing suspicion that Jack could start an interstellar incident or prevent one with equal likelihood. Sometimes, simultaneously. The USS Sardonic became something of a legend, not because of its advanced technology or its combat capabilities, but because it represented something fundamentally human, the ability to turn potential disaster into an opportunity for connection. Martinez continued to develop communication systems that were part science, part art, and entirely unpredictable. Rodriguez refined his ability to explain complex scientific principles through interpretive dance. Chen began publishing medical research papers that were also, inexplicably, award-winning poetry. But the real impact was deeper. The zorn'tak's encounter with human diplomacy spread through galactic communication networks, Other species began to realize that there was more to first contact than mathematical precision and territorial posturing. Sometimes, it was about finding connection in the most unexpected ways. Kellenex, the once feared zorn'tak commander, would later write a memoir titled How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Interpretive Dance Diplomacy. It became a bestseller across multiple star systems. The Galactic Confederation updated its first contact protocols. The new guidelines included a section that was essentially a diplomatic translation of Expect the Unexpected and Bring comfortable shoes in case spontaneous dancing breaks out. Jack Reyes received a commendation. He used the ceremony as an opportunity to tell a 20-minute joke about a quantum physicist, a penguin, and a diplomatic mission that went sideways. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the universe seemed to be laughing. Because if there was one thing humanity had proven time and again, it was this. The most powerful force in the cosmos isn't technology, it isn't military might, it isn't even intelligence. It's the ability to be absolutely, gloriously, unpredictably human. As the USS Sardonic prepared for its next mission, Jack Reyes looked out at the star-filled vista and grinned. Another day at the office was about to begin.